The velvet curtain in the nursery didn't just twitch. It ripped from the rod as Minho lunged, his fingers locking around the intruder's throat before the man could finish sliding the blade from its sheath. The cold steel brushed Minho's jugular, but he didn't flinch. He twisted, a sickening crack echoing through the room as the assassin's wrist gave way. Below them, curled on the hard hardwood floor next to the crib, Ji didn't move. Her breath was shallow, her cheek pressed against the freezing oak, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding inches from her head. Minho slammed the killer into the mahogany wardrobe, his eyes darting to the woman on the floor. She was supposed to be guarding his son. Instead, she was out cold while a hitman stood over them both. He delivered a final, crushing blow to the man's temple and knelt, not to check the pulse of the threat, but to see why his son's protector had abandoned her post. The path to this blood-stained nursery began with a contract signed in a glass skyscraper and a girl who looked too fragile to handle a diaper bag, let alone a bullet. Ji wasn't just a nanny, she was a variable Minho hadn't calculated, a shadow in his high-security fortress who seemed to be hiding more than just a resume. To understand why a billionaire tech mogul was currently shielding a sleeping girl from a pile of bodies, you have to see the secret she kept beneath her quiet exterior. The truth behind her exhaustion would either save Minho's empire or burn it to the ground. Minho stood over Ji, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, making his hands steady and his mind sharp. He wiped a smear of blood from his cuff and nudged her shoulder with the toe of his leather shoe. She didn't wake. He frowned, noticing for the first time the dark circles under her eyes that even the dim night light couldn't hide. Her fingers were curled tightly around a small plastic toy, a rattle. His son, Leo, was fast asleep in the crib, oblivious to the carnage. Minho reached down, his fingers hovering over the pulse point on Ji's neck. Her skin was clammy. He didn't call security. He picked up the discarded knife, its blade reflecting the moon, and tucked it into his waistband. He hauled the unconscious assassin out of the room by his collar, the body thudding dully against the carpeted hallway. He made a single call. Clean up in the nursery. Do not wake the nanny. He returned to the room and sat in the shadows of the rocking chair, watching Ji. She groaned in her sleep, her legs twitching as if she were running. He noticed a bruise flowering on her inner arm, partially hidden by her sleeve. It wasn't from a struggle tonight. It was old, yellowing at the edges. Minho leaned forward, the leather of the chair creaking. He had hired her because her background was a vacuum. No family, no paper trail, just a recommendation from a woman he trusted. The sun began to bleed through the blinds, casting golden bars across the floor. Ji's eyelids fluttered. She sat up with a start, her hand immediately flying to the crib. Her eyes landed on Minho, who sat perfectly still, a cup of untouched coffee in his hand. She froze. Her gaze darted to the wardrobe, where a faint smear of red remained on the wood. She looked at her own hands, then back at him. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't scream. She simply stood up, smoothed her rumpled skirt and bowed low. I overstepped, Director Kim, she whispered, her voice like dry leaves. It won't happen again. Minho stood, his shadow swallowing her. The man who tried to kill my son last night is in my basement, he said. Ji's posture didn't break, but her knuckles turned white. And you slept through it. He stepped closer, forcing her to look up. Or did you? He reached out, his fingers catching the hem of her sleeve and pulling it up. The bruise was joined by 3 others, perfectly spaced like fingerprints. Ji pulled her arm back, her face a mask of stone. I'm clumsy, Director. The stairs are steep. Minho grabbed her chin, tilting her face toward the light. Those aren't from a fall. Those are from a struggle. Who is looking for you, Ji? A heavy knock at the door interrupted them. His head of security, Park, entered, his face pale. Director, we checked the assassin's phone. He wasn't sent for you. He was sent for her. Minho didn't let go of her chin. The girl he thought was a shield for his son was actually the target. Ji's eyes finally broke. She didn't cry, but the silver in her gaze sharpened. She twisted out of his grip and walked toward the window, looking out at the sprawling Seoul skyline. If you keep me here, Leo dies, she said, her voice devoid of its previous tremor. They don't care about your tech or your money. They want what's in my head. She turned back and for the first time Minho saw the predator beneath the prey. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small encrypted drive, tossing it onto the bed. I didn't fall asleep because I was tired, Minho. I was drugged. And the person who did it is standing right behind you. Minho didn't turn around. He felt the cold barrel of a silencer press against the base of his skull. Park didn't breathe. The silence in the nursery was heavy, thick with the smell of betrayal. Minho could see his own reflection in the darkened window, a man who had built a fortress and let the enemy through the front gate. Ji didn't move toward them. She stayed by the window, her hands behind her back. "You've been on their payroll for 3 years, haven't you, Park?" she asked. The security head didn't answer. The pressure of the gun against Minho's head increased. "The drive, Ji," Park barked. "Now, or the director gets a new hole in his head." Minho's mind was a blur of schematics and tactical exits. He had built this house. Every floorboard was a sensor. Every wall had a pulse. He shifted his weight, his heel pressing into a specific knot in the oak floor. "Park," Minho said, his voice smooth as silk. "You forgot who wrote the code for this house." Before Park could pull the trigger, the floorboards beneath him retracted. It was a microsecond drop, just enough to throw his aim. The bullet zipped past Minho's ear, shattering a vase. Minho spun, a tactical knife appearing in his hand as if by magic. He drove it into Park's thigh. Ji moved with a speed that defied her small frame. She didn't run for the door. She lunged for Park, her hand striking his throat with a precision that collapsed his airway. As Park fell, clutching his neck, Ji scooped up the fallen gun. She didn't point it at Minho. She pointed it at the nursery door. "More are coming," she said, her voice now a command. "The back elevator. Now." Minho grabbed Leo from the crib, the toddler finally waking and letting out a sharp cry. They sprinted for the hidden panel behind the mahogany wardrobe. The elevator descended in a blur of brushed steel. "Who are they?" Minho demanded, checking Leo's pulse. Ji was reloading the pistol, her movements mechanical. "The Hansing Syndicate. My father was their lead chemist. He died to keep that drive out of their hands. I'm the only one who can unlock the sequence for the neural link they want." The elevator doors opened into the subgarage. 3 black SUVs were already idling. Men in tactical gear poured out, weapons raised. Minho shoved Ji behind a concrete pillar as bullets chewed through the luxury cars. "I don't care about the drive," Minho hissed, his suit jacket torn and stained. "I care about my son." He looked at the toddler, then at Minho. She handed him the pistol. "Take the armored car. The codes are in the glove box. I'll lead them away." Minho grabbed her arm. "You won't survive 5 minutes." Ji smiled, a jagged, beautiful thing. "I've survived 10 years of them. Go." She stepped out into the line of fire, her hands raised, the drive held high between her fingers. "Hey," she screamed. "You want the sequence? Come and get it." The mercenaries shifted their focus. Minho used the distraction to bolt for the reinforced sedan. He threw Leo into the back seat and keyed the ignition. The engine roared, a beast awakening. He looked in the rearview mirror as he peeled out. Ji was being swarmed, a sea of black tactical gear swallowing her small form. He didn't stop. He couldn't. He hit the gate at 80 miles per hour, the iron bars snapping like toothpicks. He was clear. He was safe. But the weight of the girl sleeping on the floor, the girl who had just traded her life for his son's, felt like a mountain in the passenger seat. If you think Ji deserved a chance to live after everything she sacrificed for a child that wasn't hers, hit the like button so her story reaches someone who can help her. The safe house was a concrete bunker disguised as a farmhouse 2 hours outside Seoul. Minho paced the length of the kitchen, Leo finally asleep in a makeshift crib. The drive Ji had tossed him was sitting on the table, glowing a soft, rhythmic blue. He was a tech genius, a man who could hack the Pentagon before breakfast, but he couldn't bring himself to touch it. Every time he looked at it, he saw the yellowing bruises on her arm. He saw her sleeping on the floor, guarding a crib while her own life was forfeit. The sun was high when his burner phone buzzed. "No caller ID." He answered on the first ring. "Director Kim," a raspy voice began. It wasn't Ji. It was Han, the head of the syndicate. "You have something of mine. I have something of yours. The girl is still alive, though she's currently wishing she wasn't." Minho's grip on the phone shattered the plastic casing. "If you touch her again, I will erase every cent of Hansing's assets before your next breath." Han laughed. "Threats from a man in hiding. How quaint. Incheon Docks. Pier 47. Midnight. Bring the drive, or I'll send her back to you in pieces small enough to fit in a bento box." Minho hung up. He looked at Leo, then at the drive. He knew what was on it now. It wasn't just a neural link sequence. It was a list of every high-ranking official the syndicate had compromised. It was the skeleton key to the country. If he gave it to them, he'd be saving a girl but condemning a nation. If he didn't, he'd be the one who let her die. He sat at his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. He didn't call the police. He didn't call the military. He called the one group of people who owed him a favor bigger than God, the Shadows of Soul, a hacktivist group he'd founded and abandoned years ago. I need a ghost protocol, Minho whispered into the mic, and I need it in 4 hours. He spent the afternoon rigging the drive. He wasn't just going to give it to them. He was going to turn it into a Trojan horse that would fry their entire network the moment it touched a server. But he needed to be close. He needed to be inside their perimeter. He looked at a photo of his late wife on the mantel. I'm sorry, he whispered. But I can't let another one disappear. Midnight at Pier 47 was a symphony of rust and fog. Minho stood at the end of the concrete pier, the drive in his open palm. A single spotlight cut through the mist, illuminating Han and a dozen armed men. In the center, tied to a chair, was Ji. Her face was a map of purple and red. Her dress was torn, her spirit seemingly extinguished. She looked up as Minho approached, her eyes widening. She shook her head frantically, the duct tape over her mouth muffling her screams. The drive director, Han said, extending a gloved hand. And the girl goes free. Minho walked forward, his footsteps echoing on the salt-stained concrete. He stopped 5 feet from Han. I want her released first. Han signaled and one of the men cut the ropes. Ji slumped to the ground, her legs too weak to hold her. She crawled toward Minho, her eyes never leaving his. The drive? Han repeated. Minho tossed it. Han caught it with a grin and slotted it into a handheld reader. Verification in progress, the device chirped. Minho grabbed Ji, pulling her up. Go, he whispered. The boat is under the pier. Ji didn't move. She grabbed Minho's jacket, her fingers digging in. It's a trap, she rasped, the tape partially torn. The boat? They already found it. Suddenly the pier erupted. Not from an explosion but from the surrounding water. 6 jet skis roared out from under the docks, their riders firing grappling hooks onto the concrete. The Shadows had arrived, but they weren't just hackers. They were the private security force Minho had spent billions training in secret. Chaos swallowed the pier. Minho shielded Ji as bullets whizzed overhead. Han screamed as the drive in his hand suddenly began to smoke, the handheld reader melting into his palm. My data, he howled. You killed it. Minho stood up, his eyes cold as the Incheon harbor. I didn't just kill the data, Han. I just sent your entire transaction history to the NIS. In 30 seconds, every asset you own will be frozen. Han pulled a gun, but Ji was faster. She didn't have a weapon, but she had the heavy iron chain from the pier's mooring. She swung it with a desperation that shattered Han's wrist. The gun clattered into the water. That's for my father, she hissed. The Shadows moved in, neutralizing the remaining syndicate men with surgical precision. But as the smoke cleared, Minho realized something was wrong. Ji was leaning against a shipping container, her hand pressed to her side. Red was blooming through her white blouse. Ji. Minho caught her as she collapsed. He pressed his hand over the wound, but the blood was hot and fast. Stay with me. The med evac is 5 minutes out. Ji looked up at him, her silver eyes cloudy. Leo? She whispered. Is he? He's safe, Minho promised, his voice cracking. He's at the bunker. He's waiting for you. He smiled, a small tired thing. I liked sleeping on the floor. It was the only place. I felt like I was guarding something real. The helicopter roared overhead, its searchlight bathing them in white. Minho carried her into the craft, his suit now completely ruined, his billionaire persona stripped away to reveal a man who finally understood what he had to lose. As they ascended, he looked down at the pier. The syndicate was gone, their empire dismantled by a single drive and a girl who refused to break. But as the medics worked on Ji, the monitor began to flatline. The rhythmic beep, beep, beep stretched into a long, terrifying drone. Subscribe if you believe that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who have nothing left to lose but their lives. The hospital room in Seoul was the most expensive in the country, but it still smelled of death and lilies. Minho sat by the bed, Leo on his lap. It had been 3 days since the pier. Ji was in a coma, the bullet having grazed her liver and caused massive internal bleeding. The doctors said it was a miracle she was alive at all, but they didn't know if she would ever wake up. Minho had stayed every hour, his empire running itself in the background while he watched the rise and fall of her chest. He looked at Leo, who was reaching out to touch Ji's hand. Nanny, the toddler whispered, the first word he'd spoken since the kidnapping. Minho felt a lump in his throat as heavy as lead. He had spent his life building walls, thinking that money and tech could keep the world at bay. He had been wrong. The only thing that had saved his son was the one thing he couldn't buy, the loyalty of a stranger. He leaned in, whispering into Ji's ear. The syndicate is gone. Han is in a black site. You're free, Ji. There are no more sequences to guard. No more fathers to avenge. Just us. He placed the small rattle she had been holding that night into her hand. Her fingers remained still. He stood to leave, the weight of the silence pressing against him. But as he reached the door, he heard a sound. A faint, rhythmic clicking. He turned. Ji's fingers were twitching. She was clicking the rattle. Her eyes were still closed, but a single tear tracked down her temple. Minho sprinted back to the bed, Leo giggling as he saw his nanny moving. Ji? Can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered, opening to reveal the sharp silver gaze he had grown to depend on. She looked at him, then at Leo, then at the luxury room. Director, she croaked, her voice raw. Is this coming out of my paycheck? Minho laughed, a sound that felt like the first breath of air after being underwater. He grabbed her hand, squeezing it tight. No, Ji. This is a bonus. She closed her eyes again, but she didn't let go of his hand. Good. Because the floor was very uncomfortable. Minho stayed there, the three of them silhouetted against the Seoul sunset. The tech mogul, the toddler, and the nanny. A family built not on blood, but on the fire they had survived together. 6 months later. The Kim estate was different now. The mahogany wardrobe was gone, replaced by a playroom with soft mats and bright colors. Minho sat at the kitchen island, watching Ji through the window. She was in the garden with Leo, teaching him how to plant peonies. She moved with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of Pier 47, but she moved with a grace she had never had before. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was the heart of the house. Minho walked out to join them, the sun warm on his back. He handed Ji a glass of water, his fingers lingering on hers. The NS called, he said quietly. They want you to consult on the new security protocols. They say you're the only one who can think like the Hanseng. Ji took a sip of water, looking at Leo as he chased a butterfly. Tell them I'm busy. I have a very important appointment. Minho raised an eyebrow. Oh? With who? Ji smiled, the sharp edge of her past finally blunted by the peace of the present. With a toddler who refuses to take a nap. And a boss who still doesn't know how to make a decent cup of coffee. Minho laughed, pulling her into a side hug. He looked at his son, then at the woman who had saved them both. He didn't need a skyscraper or $1 billion to feel powerful. He just needed this. If this story broke your heart and put it back together again, leave a like so I know to tell more stories like this. The sun set over the garden, casting long, peaceful shadows. The fortress was gone, replaced by a home. And as they walked inside together, the only sound was the laughter of a child and the quiet, steady rhythm of two people who had finally found where they belonged. Ji didn't sleep on the floor anymore. She slept in the warmth of a life she had earned, guarding the only thing that ever mattered. The sequence was finally complete. The neural link was love. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who risked everything for the truth. Because in the end, the most powerful technology in the world is the human heart. And the Kim family was finally offline, living the only story that ever mattered. The piece of the Kim estate was a fragile glass sculpture, and it shattered the moment a black drone hovered silently outside the nursery window at 3 a.m. Minho didn't see it, but Ji did. Her eyes snapped open before the machine's red optical lens could even focus. She didn't reach for a weapon, she reached for the baby monitor. Minho, the perimeter is breached, she whispered into the device. In the bedroom down the hall, Minho rolled out of bed, his feet hitting the floor in a tactical crouch. The house's sleep mode was instantly overridden by a void protocol. Every light in the mansion died, replaced by the eerie rhythmic pulse of infrared floor lighting. Ji didn't wait for him. She scooped Leo into a specialized bulletproof carrier strapped to her chest and slid into the shadows of the floorboards. She knew the blind spots of her own security system better than the architects. She heard the soft thwip of a grappling hook catching the balcony railing. They weren't just after the drive this time, they were after the girl who had deleted the empire. A man in a chameleon suit, fabric that mimicked the wallpaper, stepped into the room. He was a ghost, invisible to the naked eye, but Ji smelled the ozone of his cloaking device. She waited until his foot pressed the third floorboard from the crib, then she lunged with a ceramic blade that wouldn't trip a metal detector. The ghost soldier collapsed before he could scream, but the drone outside fired a sonic pulse that shattered the nursery windows. The glass didn't rain down, it was sucked outward by the pressure differential Minho had engineered. The garage is compromised. Minho's voice crackled through her earpiece. Ji, get to the roof? The helipad is the only exit left. G scaled the service ladder, the weight of the sleeping toddler a constant reminder of the stakes. She emerged onto the rooftop to find Minho already there, but he wasn't alone. Standing between him and the chopper was a woman G thought was dead. Minho's former lead researcher, Sarah, who had disappeared the night the Neuralink project was first stolen. "You were always too sentimental, Minho," Sarah said, holding a detonator that hummed with a low-frequency vibration. "You thought you were protecting a nanny, but you were just housing a prototype." G froze. She looked at Minho, her silver eyes searching for a denial that didn't come. "Prototype?" G rasped. Sarah laughed, the sound cold and clinical. "Why do you think your father was a chemist, G? He wasn't working on a drive. He was working on you. The sequence isn't on a flash drive. It's written into your genetic code. You aren't just the guardian, you are the source." Minho took a step toward G, his hands open in a gesture of desperate honesty. "I didn't know at first, G. I swear. By the time I realized what your father had done, I was already in love with the woman you had become. I wasn't guarding a prototype. I was guarding my life." Sarah sneered and pressed a button on the detonator. The helipad began to glow with an electromagnetic pulse. "If I can't have the code, I'll let the EMP fry your nervous system. Let's see how much your love matters when her brain is a blank slate. If you believe that a person's soul is more than just a sequence of code, hit the like button so G's humanity can overcome the machine." The air began to hum with a lethal charge, the blue sparks of the EMP crawling up the metal struts of the roof. G felt a searing pain behind her eyes, the sequence in her mind beginning to vibrate under the digital assault. She looked at Leo, then at Minho. She realized that Sarah was right about one thing: she was the key. But she wasn't a lock to be opened, she was a firewall. G closed her eyes and did something her father had taught her in the dark of their basement a lifetime ago. She didn't fight the EMP. She absorbed it. Her body arched as the blue light flooded her veins, her silver eyes glowing with a blinding intensity. The neural link within her didn't fry, it synchronized. She reached out a hand toward the drone and the detonator in Sarah's hand. With a single thought, she sent a feedback loop through the air. The drone exploded in a shower of sparks, and the detonator melted in Sarah's grip. The rooftop went silent, the only sound the heavy breathing of 3 people and the soft coo of a baby who had finally woken up. Sarah fell to her knees, staring at her scorched hands in disbelief. "It's impossible. No human could channel that much data." G stood tall, the glow in her eyes fading back to their natural silver. "I'm not a prototype," she said, her voice echoing with a strange harmonic power. "I'm a mother." Minho reached her just as her legs gave out. He caught her, pulling her and Leo into his arms. Sarah was dragged away by the real security team, but G didn't watch her go. She looked at Minho, her hand touching his face. "You knew," she whispered. Minho nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I knew you were special. I just didn't realize you were the miracle the world was looking for." They stood on the roof of the fortress as the sun began to rise over Seoul. The shadows had been purged, the project was finally destroyed by G's own mind, and the secret of her blood was buried under a layer of encrypted love. 1 year later, the Kim family lived in a place with no drones, no sensors, and no glass skyscrapers. They lived in a small valley where the only thing G had to guard was the garden and the boy who called her Mama. Minho didn't build skyscrapers anymore, he built schools. And every night, before they went to sleep, G didn't check the perimeter. She checked the crypt. Because she knew that no matter what was written in her code, the only sequence that mattered was the one that brought them home.